to really have AI realize its full potential, it needs to understand the real world. And understanding the real world means having a sense of visual understanding and reasoning and capability, being able to understand context, navigate environment, make decisions. And as exciting and prominent as language is, vision is humans' first sense. Like, we actually had our sense of sight before we even had the ability to construct language. And so every product, every service will also have the ability to make visual understanding and visual decisions. And that starts with computer vision and visual AI.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Joseph Nelson, co-founder and CEO of Roboflow, building computer vision tools for developers and enterprises.
Giving a camera the intelligence and deploying it and relying on it previously, would maybe be like a quarter's worth of work, and not so long ago, like a PhD thesis. And now with current tools, you can do that in an afternoon.
Roboflow has over 1.3 million active developers, hundreds of millions of pre-trained labeled open source images and models. We talk through what's coming next with visual AI agents, and Joseph even pulls up some live examples.
Tell me whenever a package shows up on my doorstep. Tell me whenever there looks like there's going to be a jam on my line.
Customer service lessons from Stripe.
Patrick would just show up at your office, get on your computer, and install Stripe.
Learnings from Palantir's forward deployed engineers.
I think startups fail to mimic this because a lot of them don't realize
Developer tool business models.
Is our self-serve plan its own line of business? Or is it lead gen for our enterprise business?
His experience working with David Sachs.
And the best way to realize the impact of AI is to put it in the hands of builders, to see what it can do, to see what it can't do. Having someone like David Sachs thinking about AI policy is a good vote of confidence for ensuring that companies can continue to tinker and explore usage.
He also shares how Roboflow consistently gets on the front page of Hacker News, what it was like growing up in Iowa, and coding calculator games as a kid. Our conversation helped me understand just how much computer vision has yet to and will further impact AI and software. But before we talk to Joseph, I publish new episodes of The Peel every week exploring the world's greatest startup stories. Check the show notes for more on the topics we discussed and subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a future episode. Let's talk to Joseph. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. We're going to talk computer vision. We're going to talk building developer tools, a ton of fun stuff, marketing, some of the fun antics that you've been up to. Can you really quick before we get in talk about Roboflow?
Roboflow enables developers and enterprises to use computer vision in production. What our mission is, we say, is to make the world programmable. Basically, like every scene and everything that you and I can understand with our eyes, our software will be able to soon. And for that transition to happen, there needs to be tools, community, infrastructure to accelerate that transition. So Roboflow builds tools for data set understanding, tools for model training, and tools for deployment so that enterprises and developers can deploy systems for visual understanding.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's basically computer vision, if that's kind of like the layman's terms for it. Is it? And I think you actually think the opportunity in computer vision is probably a lot bigger than most people would think. Can you just explain that and make me think the same thing after hearing you talking about it?
It's pretty simple. I mean, think about the human brain. Your brain, about 50% of neurons are used for processing visual information. And as we think about the transformation of software, increasingly being able to have the capabilities of reasoning and understanding and thinking like the intelligence humans have, you can imagine that we'll approximate what humans can do in our software. And so if you already think that like 50% of our processing power is spent on visual understanding, software has a long way to go. Even in a more like practical way, you can think about it like for AI to really have the impact that we know that it should, it needs to understand the world around us, the real world. That's, being able to understand context, navigate environment, make decisions. And as exciting and prominent as language is, vision is, actually like humans' first sense. Like we actually had our sense of sight before we even had the ability to construct language.
One way to think about it then is you've I feel like you've kind of mentioned this in the past of like, it's almost like this new input level, maybe like visual is a way to like input data into computers. Like, is that fair to say?
The reason that visual understanding will be at least as big as, or likely bigger than, even language and LLMs and what you're seeing across AI is to really have AI realize its full potential. It needs to understand the real world. And understanding the real world means having a sense of visual understanding and reasoning and capability. And if you think about it in a very fundamental way, half of the neurons in our brains are used for visual processing of information. The same will be true for software. And a very early example of this is, the power of self-driving cars and how revolutionary that is. That same transition of a vehicle will exist for the way that we produce things, the way that we ship things, the way that we purchase things, the ingredients that we know we stock our kitchens with. Every go through your day, every part of the way you experience the world starts with your ability to see things. That means like accelerating cancer research, of automating counting of what are called neutrophils after you like perform an experiment I learned from whatever user. It means making underwater autonomous robots that like go clean up plastic in the world's ocean. It means producing electric vehicles more effectively. One of our customers that produces EVs efficiently and wants to do that right the first time.
EVs, electric vehicles?
Yeah, making EVs correctly the first time. It means shipping things from like point A to point B. Like, I kind of joke that sometimes Roboflow powers Santa Claus because ensuring that this holiday season, things show up where they should is dependent upon each item being cataloged correctly, received correctly, inventoried, stored, sent. It means actually like even entertainment, making the world more fun. Like the snap lenses that you might use to interact with the world or adding a sense of delight. It permeates every part of how we interact with the world. And it starts with a sense of visual understanding. So we have this insight, years ago, and remain incredibly convinced that it's still dramatically underexplored and underutilized. And a big reason for that is the tooling and the community and the infrastructure is missing to accelerate that transition.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it's sort of this entirely new way to interact with a computer, interact with data or collect data, inform decision making. When you talk about AI, like influencing a model, building a model, like it's like a whole new paradigm of like how to control an electronic or control a piece of software or robotics or like physical things like you talked about.
It's a great way to think about it. In some ways, it's like the biggest competitor we joke sometimes is like a keyboard. Like the way that a computer gets to understand something is you either input the data kind of manually or it just sees and understands and actions things for you. So a different input mechanism, I think, is a great way to characterize.
A big thing right now has been voice in AI, like interacting, using voice as kind of this interface to interact with an LLM. Like the first maybe year, 2 years was just like a chat bot basically. It's pretty simple, worked decently well. I think now we're starting to see a wave of all these startups that are building products around voice. And then computer vision kind of feels like this whole new level on top of that, where it's like you've got text, you've got voice, and the computer can actually see. Like that kind of opens up an entirely new, like exponentially different paradigm of what can be done.
Think about this too, like voice, language, these things are both like inherently like human centric. Like humans produce a voice, humans produce language. Sight exists both with humans and in places humans are not, right? Like you want to observe processes even if a person isn't there. So if you think of it from like a very like first principles way of the things that need to be seen, observed, understood, and actioned across our universe is way, way, way wider than things that are constrained to just what people interact with. And so visual sensing and visual understanding is, I think, the most underutilized sense that we collectively, humanity, have yet to put to use.
Like to put it on software or digitize it, I guess.
Yeah, observe you think like I grew up in Iowa and my family has a farm. You can have a system that exists in a field that has limited or no internet connection that needs to make decisions about where to plant things, where to deploy herbicide. And that system needs a sense of sight to do its role effectively. And there's no human that's in that loop. this is kind of what I mean. There's so many places throughout the world where a sense of visual understanding, reasoning, and action is yet to make an impact, and it will.
I think one thing that could be interesting, we were going to do kind of some live demos of examples. We've never done this on the show before, like a live screen share. Any examples you can kind of pull up to kind of show us?
One of the very first things that motivated the aha moment for us and a lot of people that inspired what Roboflow grew into is building with augmented reality, which in a lot of ways, AR is kind of like the front end for computer vision. Like computer vision is the back end. Like it understands the logic and the relation of things and spatial reasoning, and it gives you the context. And then AR is the front end. It's the UX and UI for interacting with visual understanding. And so to create like the aha moment, AR is sometimes a good way to show what's going on when computer vision is taking place. And in 2017, Apple released AR Kit, augmented reality kit. And my co-founder and I, we were just sort of friends at the time that we're both interested in new technologies, made this app called Magic Sudoku that solves Sudoku puzzles. And yeah, I can screen share that for you for folks that are on video. Otherwise, I'll just kind of narrate it here. So the core insight here is, you carry around this pocket supercomputer, your phone, which has more intelligence and processing power than even what we used to land on the moon in the Apollo mission. And a lot of that compute's not put to use, especially in the context of understanding the world around us. And so Brad had this idea, well, what if we made a Sudoku solver and, kind of ruin the game of Sudoku? Would it be a fun, like, aha moment? And so we made this app that you hold it over top of a Sudoku puzzle. It understands the state of the board, the empty numbers, where the correct number should be. And then it fills it all in kind of magically right before your eyes. And, it's a good party trick of ruining the Sudoku puzzle. And sometimes when I want to play and I see someone doing Sudoku next to me, I'm like, oh man, I'm really tempted. Blow your mind with what's sort of possible. But it delivers this really powerful moment of, wow, I have the power to interact with the world in a way that we didn't previously understand. And Magic Sudoku was very much a flash in the pan kind of moment. Like we built it as a side project out of interest of playing with augmented reality and AR applications in 2017, right? And that year, it went mini internet viral, made it to the top of some subreddit. It won Product Hunt AR App of the Year.
Yeah, it looks like the tweet that you have pulled up has 4,000 likes. So it looks like it got, and this was pre-views. It doesn't show us views, but my guess is at least a couple, probably mid-100, maybe a million views on 100,000 to a million views on Twitter.
It's still Brad's pinned tweet, so I think folks continue to see and experience this example.
And Brad, your co-founder?
Brad's my co-founder. And the insight here is it creates this this aha moment for interacting with the world that our software currently isn't. And while it's sort of a toy example of interacting with puzzles, there's so many implications here. And, again, we made this as a side project well before Roboflow was even an idea of a company. And what we kind of assumed would happen is creating an example like this would inspire other developers to create AR apps to interact with the real world too. We thought that'd be kind of like an explosion, like developers building for this new paradigm. That didn't really happen from 2017, 2018, 2019. Honestly, it still hasn't really happened. Maybe it's a good thing that we pivoted away from doing AR stuff. But in 2019, Brad and I got to talking again, and we'd both kind of exited the prior things we were working on. And we said, that flash in the pan moment of building Magic Sudoku, why aren't more people realizing and building for this really important primitive, this sense of visual understanding? And so we began to ask ourselves what it would look like to build a better version of Magic Sudoku and eventually release SDKs so people could build their own experiences of, you could think point your phone at something and it tells you the brand of something or the amount of calories and food you're consuming.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't you just use Google SDKs, Apple SDKs? Was it not a part of what they released? Was it OpenAI? Do they have any developer tools yet? Was there existing stuff out there?
We're talking 2017 when we first built this, and then 2019, which is pre a lot of high quality advances that have taken place. And even still, actually, we have yet to realize the promise of truly on device, real time visual understanding in AI. It's coming. But even with those APIs and those tools, there's still a lot of missing infrastructure. So for example, like we got to work and we said, okay, if we want to make this AR app that understands everything in the world, what we need to do is just progressively add more things to this consumer app. And we decided to start with board games because they're social by default. It's kind of fun. We had a history of success there. So we built like a chess solver. We built like a boggle solver, which is like this 4x4 like letter word game.
I feel like you told me about that before. Yeah.
Yeah. And like these apps, they gained a lot of popularity and kind of like slowly died. Like is very clearly like, oh, that's interesting. Not like, oh, I need that and I can't wait to use it. But in pursuit of building those apps, we realized a lot of the infrastructure you just alluded to is missing. So for example, like if you want to build an app that understands a chessboard, there's like hundreds, thousands of different chessboards. There's like Harry Potter chess. There's like US Chess Federation version of chess. There's custom pieces. There's rocks that like represent pieces. There's different angles by which someone could look at the board. There's different lighting conditions. And all of those things mean that you need to have a model that can understand, represent, and interact in all those scenarios and all those settings. So we realized, okay, we have this like data problem. And then we got to the model training part. We're like, oh man, like we're using Core ML or Create ML to train Core ML models. And then we got to the deployment part and we're like, well, we need this model to be optimized for iPhone and eventually Android devices, validate that the model's seen what it says it's seen. So we built a lot of this internal tooling to release our consumer apps more quickly. And we realized that, because the so-called shark fin graph we were experiencing of the consumer apps were a big shoot up and then like kind of slowly atrophy of usage. Perhaps we should go all in on the reason we were building those apps, which is empowering and inspiring and giving people tools. And so that's what like Roboflow came out of, is like this core insight. And like I mentioned to you, like the world still hasn't comprehended or really put to use what visual understanding is. And multimodal advances in AI are helping. It's helping give folks the realization, the ease of use, the starting with a pre-trained model that can understand visual things a bit better. And that's encouraging inspiration and possibility and capability. But there's still just this huge gap of like evaluating that the thing's doing what I want it to do, making it work with my data, making it work real time, integrating it with the other systems that I have. And to really realize the promise of visual understanding and truly giving the sense of sight to our software, there's still a long way to go of the tools and the capability. So, the present day Roboflow, we've made good progress against that. A little over 1.3 million developers downloading our open source in the last 30 days. A platform where on the open source side, you have hundreds of thousands of models that people can take and use and hundreds of millions of labeled images that can get people started. But still, like, there's 70 million developers out there and billions of people that will experience the power of sight, like in their hand or in their machines or in their day-to-day life or in their factories or in their ports. And so it's a good start, but such a long way to go for realizing what it means to give a sense of visual understanding.
So when you talk about, you have all these like pre-built models and like data or images, I think you said hundreds of millions of images. Maybe you said millions, I forget. But so what does that mean exactly? Like I'm a developer, I'm working at, I don't know, we'll say I'm working at like a logistics company. Like we'll say I'm like working at the ports. Like they just went on strike. We want to automate it. I go into Roboflow, like what might I be able to take advantage of to just get started and work on my like automating the port system, some kind of like software to doing that?
Roboflow has tools for everything you need to deploy a system for visual understanding. So that's like data tooling for preparing data sets, knowing you have the right data, automating labeling, curation, tools for training models and fine-tuning foundation models so that it works on your data, whether that's recent releases like Polygemma 2 or point-specific fast object detectors, or using like GBT in tandem with some of your own models, and tools for deployment. So you can chain together models and create visual agents that you can basically like give an objective and say, hey, watch this video feed and text me if you see a hazard or something like that. And so we kind of have like the core tools. And of course, you can use those tools with your existing favorite tools. You can use pieces and parts of our stack. Our goal is ultimately to enable you to build the system the way that you want to use it with the tools that are best fit for your part of the task. If you came and you said, hey, I had this logistics problem, the cool thing about Roboflow is we're really invested in ensuring that the full potential of computer vision is understood, which means giving the community tools. So giving people access to using foundation models to automatically label data or GPU to train their own models, especially on the open source side of things. So there's hundreds of millions of models, those are images, those aren't ours. That's the community. Like when you sign up for Roboflow, you have the option, similar to GitHub, creating a public project, an open source project, and advancing the field of computer vision. You can also create a private project and generate your own maybe proprietary models, proprietary systems, and work with creating advantages for your business or your enterprise. Those open source models and data sets has become the largest collection of open source images and models on the web today. And so if you wanted to start working on, I don't know, like shipping containers or like boxes going down an assembly line, we call the open source community Roboflow Universe. So you go to Roboflow Universe and you can search for data sets and models that might already understand the labels for maybe doing recognition and understanding of the characters on the shipping container, maybe counting the boxes, knowing how many boxes entered your facility, how long they were stuck at one point in time, ensuring that like the cycle time in the facilities are matching with what your performance schema is, even keeping track of like knowing what entered and left your facility.
Yep. So this is like all things that a human could pretty easily simply do, like just count the boxes or whatever. But there's not really good tools to like have a computer do that with. Like you need a camera, you need some kind of vision image input, and then you need a way to like recognize like the human brain. You're like, that's a box. That's, you know, this is like a boat. This is a dog or whatever.
Yeah. That's kind of maybe like the open secret is that like there's a lot of visual understanding challenges that are not inherently like complex. As you said, like counting boxes isn't maybe the hardest thing for a human to do. Giving a camera the intelligence and deploying it and relying on it previously, you know, would maybe be like a quarter's worth of work. And not so long ago, like 5 years ago, like a PhD thesis of like building a system that can do that. And now with current tools, you can do that in an afternoon and you can deploy it and make sure that it does what you want it to do. And maybe it sends you a text or integrates with your ERP if you're an enterprise.
So like the camera inputting the boxes going down the line spits out and, you know, tracks your inventory count going in and out or something like that, which then could like hit your P&L and all that stuff.
Exactly. Like we like to say like basically like any actionable insight from like a video, like you said, like maybe like some of our customers have cameras deployed inside the factories and facilities. One of them, for example, makes wallboard and ceiling tile. So you can think like you've seen like the ceiling tile in like a common office or like wallboard for
the drop ceiling, drop tiles.
Exactly. Like you remember in like elementary school, you would take like your pencil and you like put a little sticky note on it, you'd throw it up and it'd get stuck and it'd say like, you'd write like gullible on the sticky note, throw it into the ceiling. You'd be like, hey, gullible's written on the ceiling. And you're like, oh no, it's not. That ceiling tile that the pencil would get stuck in, one of our customers makes.
Okay.
That process, for example, like they have some problems where there are processes that they know how they want them to run. They want to produce the right amount. It needs to be at the right angle and dimensions, the right formulation. And a lot of those problems are visual validation type problems. And so any camera, maybe they already have cameras because they have like security footage, or maybe they're going to install like a new low cost camera. Any camera immediately becomes smart. And you can add, hey, you know, alert me if production is lower than the amount that I expected on a given point in time. Or if the color or the formulation is different than what I expected it to be.
So you can make it where it's not even on the camera level. It's like the video feed, like the video data that's coming in, you can actually make decisions on and act on.
Exactly. Yeah. The video, like think of this like stateful analytics. Like you might want to retain state across within an hour, within a minute, like what's going on. Or another one of our customers, I mean, speaking of like hard video problems, they power the broadcast at Wimbledon and the US Open. And that video problem is super high stakes because you have a live broadcast and you're going to action information of the position of the tennis ball, the position of the player, the position of the court, and the risk tolerance, or the error tolerance, I should say, is minimal because you're going to be showing replays, you're going to be dicing things up. So it's running in real time, it's running at the edge, and it's running on the video to make decisions about how they showcase their broadcast capabilities. And so video is, I think, a hugely growing and underutilized as well source of this visual information.
Interesting. This is sort of related. I had a job and a job is like in quotes because I just got free tickets to the games. But I work for the AHL American Hockey League team in Grand Rapids and College of Grand Rapids Griffins. I was kind of on the stats team for the game. I maybe did this maybe 10 or 15 times one season or throughout the course of 2 seasons, where you sit way up, way above the rink. Like you sit basically, you're like a full 2 stories above the last seats. There's just a bunch of like people that sit up there and they like keep stats of the game. And my job specifically was recording who was on the ice at any given time. So anytime someone got off, I had to swap out and know who was on. And that falls into like who's on the ice, like plus minus their stats, like getting assists and goals. That usually came down to like the refs on the ice. But my job specifically was I was basically like computer vision of knowing who was on the ice at any given time. Didn't get paid. I mean, I got free tickets basically to like a different game. So it was fun because I like hockey and I played growing up. So, but it's like one of those things that could be completely automated, and then you could pipe that to the screen too, and you can have like live feed of. I mean, every sports broadcast has stats that they show during the games, and you're even seeing now. I think during like Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime, there'll be like a red circle around a guy who has like a high probability of blitzing. I don't know if you've seen that. So it's kind of cool how it can really play out into literally everything. Every piece around us that like has some kind of computer can probably in some way be impacted.
Sports analytics has been one of the places where we've created a lot of examples and attracted a lot of interest for this reason. Like there's a lot of, as you mentioned, minor leagues, like the Grand Rapids Griffins, which feed into the Red Wings, but they even have teams that are in minor league divisions below that. And they have some scouts that are like recording things, but they also have a lot of video and they can automate, as you said, the collection of shift times, but also like passes, zone entries. And this applies for every single sport has this sort of problem. But it's a really visceral example of, wow, what would I do if I could just automatically know everything that took place in this video and how would I action that information?
Yeah, like the data is there. Like if you're basically unlocking a new data source or it's like a latent data source where it all exists. You don't really have to do anything different as long as you're collecting the video feed. It's just like creating new data that you previously didn't have access to.
That's a great way. It's a great way to think about it.
That's your new front page of the pitch deck.
Thank you. Speaking of sports, I mean, I just pulled up a screen share here. We build a lot of examples in soccer, for example, because it's so accessible. And you can do things like produce FIFA-like animations of like the active player, who has the ball, where the ref is on the pitch, and produce insights around maybe possession or passes. And it's an accessible way to unlock this idea of, I have a video, maybe a live stream, and I want to collect action and create insights on what's taking place. We actually, I mean, we can put this in the show note that we made a 90-minute like YouTube teardown tutorial of building really comprehensive soccer analytics. We call it football analytics because the team member that worked on it is international. So I think thinking through sports is an accessible example.
Well, so then another question that kind of comes out of all this is, it's sort of this new technology or this new, like there's not really a lot of examples of like, how do you price some of this stuff, thinking about the business model. Like it sounds like there's kind of some hobbyists, people doing it for fun, but you also have, multinational, global shipping company that could be a customer. Like what does a business model for something like this look like?
Fortunately, developer tools are increasingly a known quantity and a known business. You have publicly traded companies like Elastic and HashiCorp and Mongo. And what tends to work quite well is continuing to build open source capabilities to inspire and showcase what's possible and put tools in the hands of builders and developers to expose to the world what's possible. Like I mentioned, like a big part of Roboflow is to just advance humanity's ability to process visual information. And we can't do that alone. And so putting open source tools out there inspires, delights, and allows folks to create their own examples and showcase what's possible. Then we also offer a platform. And in that platform has a free way to get up and started so that folks can experience and see the power of building with computer vision on their own examples, open source or private. Then we have a self-serve tier. So if you're a hobbyist or a small business, a startup, a way that you can credit card swipe and get up and going. The difference between the free and the paid tier is you have more usage limits and richer set of capabilities that are particularly relevant when you're working on a business problem. And then we have an enterprise tier, and enterprises have unique set of needs around deploying things at high scale, deploying them securely, performance guarantees. They have quite a bit of needs around data access control, especially in AI. And so ensuring and demonstrating and providing that level of certainty are all things that enterprises are willing to pay for and need to power their businesses. And so that's the way that we approach the go-to-market is, continue to focus on providing value up front, and where there's things that align with people that are producing their own value, being able to share on the upside of their growth.
Yeah, it sounds like basically give it away for free, but then if you use it for a commercial purpose, it sounds like that's when you start to make money as Roboflow. You kind of monetize commercial usage.
That's a great way to align things is if you're building a business with some of the tooling that we're able to provide, at some point, ideally, we're able to share in providing that. Now, the limit's probably we err towards being more generous than less. I think there's just so much in the way of showcasing what's possible. Though, of course, we need to make money to fuel our mission and continue to invest in providing the capabilities. So, for example, we've given researchers and open source projects over a million hours in free GPU time to showcase and produce their own models on their own examples.
What's the dollar value of that?
GPUs range anywhere from 80 cents an hour to, if you want during the scarcity of H100, as high as $3-4 an hour. So at least $1 million of compute provided.
So say 1 to 5 million in free compute, something like that.
Yeah.
Good range. cover your bases in case it's higher or lower.
Yeah. I mean, we do our best to optimize our own cost of putting folks on instances that are available and these sorts of things. The underscored point there is delivering the infrastructure so someone can explore, create, and advance what's possible with computer vision is as important as ensuring that we're unlocking commercial value for our customers. And so, yeah, like you said, kind of if you're doing open source work and along the mission of advancing and showcasing what's possible, we want that to be free, available, and open. To subsidize that, we want to work with businesses to ensure that as they produce value for the problems they're solving, we're also sharing in the upside. And like you said, that tends to be a really useful axis tends to be, do you need what you're doing to be proprietary? And if what you're doing, you need to be proprietary, generally you're aiming to build a business with it. And we want to be a partner to that success.
So if you're doing any kind of developer tooling business model, that's one angle you can kind of start to price based on.
Yeah. I mean, the specific things that we price against, it's mostly usage based, meaning the more value we're able to provide in terms of the consumption of our products, then the more revenue we're able to obtain as well, which I think also really aligns with customer incentive.
Yeah, and one thing that Nader at Brev / acquired by NVIDIA, he said you guys are super hands-on with to the point of he felt, I think his words were it felt like you're more of a services company than a software company because you're just so hands-on with helping them through, implementing the product, customer service. How do you think about that? That almost sounds unsustainable when he tells me that. It's man, how are you so hands-on with the product and so helpful to customers?
Nader was one of our very first customers. He was actually in the YC batch before ours. And the company he was working on in YC, he pivoted into building a pill counting startup, and he used Roboflow for the pill counting startup. And you can kind of think about that as for us, just getting customers and seeing what's working and understanding where someone's not able to get to value was probably more valuable than even the revenue we were going to obtain. And so, there's this concept of the Collison Install popularized by Patrick Collison, where back when Stripe was getting started and he wanted companies to be able to process their payments with Stripe, Patrick would just show up at your office, get on your computer, and install Stripe in your app so that you were able to successfully process payments. And I think that's like a really good mental model for how to think about servicing your first customers. You just learn so much, like what was in the way for them to be successful, what sort of tooling and capabilities did they need. And then over time, you paper over that with building features that productize your learning. And so Natter, being a customer in 2020, the tool is just like first available.
Yeah, it sounds like he was early customer for one of the first.
Yeah, and like what's important there is like you're begging basically to have someone even like use your thing, let alone like get to value with it. And so you're learning a ton about the capabilities there. And then you productize those learnings so that, as you said, it becomes more scalable and sustainable as a business. What's interesting is that like on the enterprise side of the business, that's still a lot of what enterprises want when they work with software companies is they want the ability to be hands-on. They want the trust of integrating with their system. And generally, like on the enterprise side, the amount of value that you're delivering to the problem they're solving justifies a higher price point, right? And I mean, the most extreme version of this business model has been popularized by Palantir, where you have forward deployed engineers who kind of show up and are like, I'll build whatever you need, and then figure out like what products ensue from doing that. And I think there's like good discussion of like how much you want to lean into fully that versus like solutions engineers versus like very little on the way of customer side.
Yeah. How would you think about like tiers or threshold? Because it doesn't Palantir, I'm not super familiar, but they have some like 8-figure contracts, right? Where like someone might be paying them 10 million, 50 million bucks. But you could probably afford like, all right, we got someone's salary that's there full time. Like that's 1% of the margin, less than that. How would you think about just like, what's the threshold of too much or too little?
The thing about Palantir, and folks have written about this at length, is they were aligned with their investors that in the early days, they were going to sign contracts that they knew they were underwater on. And their thesis and their bet was they would discover the stickiest enterprise problem. And in discovering those problems, two things would result. One, they'd be able to deliver so much value from some of the solutions that ultimately worked out. And B, they'd be able to productize some of those learning. I think startups fail to mimic this because a lot of them don't realize A, the capital intensity of deploying a strategy like that, or B, they're fooling themselves into thinking they're solving a problem that they can command Palantir ACVs, contract value, when the problem that they're solving might not be that big. One thing that like Palantir had to its favor is by servicing government, there's higher barriers to entry, and that allows you to preserve your margin, I think, over a bit longer duration than purely like private sector example. I think there's a lot of things that are unique to Palantir, and just cargo culting that I think is risky. The way we think about that at Roboflow is you have enterprise customers where a few things can be true. One is the problem that is being solved with that customer deployed at scale will be so valuable and so great that you can trust and invest in ensuring that their rollout is going to be the types of bets you should place. For example, some of our customers, as you mentioned, are the world's largest like shippers in the world. And computer vision is a new capability. It kind of flips their whole business model on its head. Like a lot of times they don't know where inventory is. And these businesses are understandably skeptical of something that could be like so good or so useful.
Yeah, it just sounds like, you're pulling one over on me. Like there's no way this is even possible.
Exactly. And that's kind of like, you kind of want to have a product where like it's almost so good that it doesn't sound like it can be true for somebody, for your customer. Well, when you find yourself in that position, that means you need to realize that promise. And so they're healthily skeptical perhaps of delivering on that promise, which means you can say, okay, great. If we get this solution rolled out and at the scale that you're operating at, it's going to deliver an insane amount of value, like hundreds of millions of ROI deployed at scale inside your business. Now, I understand you have hesitancy of if this is really going to work the way that you think because you've not seen this technology. So we'll work with you on like maybe a smaller single site to validate and prove and demonstrate that this works. And
you'll be super hands-on, just making sure.
And be super hands-on and integrated with the systems and those capabilities. And as long as you can develop the rapport and trust and mutual alignment with the customer that, hey, everyone, same page, if this does what it says it's going to do, your business is fundamentally different. And we can realize the shared upside from doing so. And I think that's a key thing. A second way that some businesses can justify the very hands-on rollouts in enterprise context is if you're opening up a new market. Like maybe you're building like a product or a solution, and that's not so different than like a very first like seed stage startup. Like definitionally, a seed stage startup has no customers a lot of the time. And so you're building stuff and you're already, of course, burning more than you're obtaining if you have no revenue. And so you're making a focused bet on a market. And the same thing could exist like in a new enterprise deployment. So the hands-on strategy, there's a gradient to it, and it needs to be aligned to your customer's expectation, and you need to be realistic about the market opportunity of what happens, the so what, if you get that rollout. And that's why I mentioned like at Roboflow, we have both the enterprise rollouts, which some of them can look very hands-on. Some are actually still pretty turnkey from the perspective of us and the customer. And then you have the self-serve tier where the expectation is such that the customer knows, oh, this is the product I need, this is the infrastructure I need, and it solves my capability. And I think it's a superpower for companies to be able to do both of these. A company that can both have a self-serve tier and an enterprise motion, if you think about it, you kind of want like some customers, as a startup, you want some customers that they're building like so fast that you're almost scared that you're not going to be able to keep up with the pace of what they need. And then on the flip side, you want customers that are so large that they kind of fund the build. Startup customers typically fall into that first category, or at least like small businesses, where they're often louder with their feedback. They're often challenging you, and they're giving you a lot of direction of how to build your product. And building an AI, like speed is everything. Models are changing, the capabilities are changing, and you want to be in a position where the success of your business is aligned to your customers being able to deploy their solutions to production. Like you want to be a little bit like healthily scared of like being able to move fast enough to keep up with those customers. Concurrently, serving enterprises are generally slower moving and interestingly, like lower feedback about like problems and capabilities and deployments. And a startup gives itself a huge advantage in having very loud, fast feedback to build a high quality product, service fast moving customers concurrent with enterprise. I'll give you another example of how this superpower shows up. One of our enterprise customers purchased Roboflow in June 2023. And they had some ambitions of what they wanted to roll out. They're a Fortune 100 customer. And the rollout would require quite a bit of like hands-on work, especially if the product is not easy to use. But because we have this whole self-serve ethos in the business, we're holding ourselves accountable that like a user can show up, sign up, and get to value without talking to anybody. And so this enterprise that purchased, by 1 year later, June 24, had rolled out hundreds of examples inside their company. And they did that in a self-serve way. That's only possible because you've built a product that's so intuitive and able to be adopted and consumed that you get that type of viral adoption and scale inside the company. And again, you can wish for that, but the best way to realize being aligned to making a product that's so easy to use is to have a line of business connected to it. And for us, that's like the self-serve business line. And so the two play off of each other, I think, incredibly well.
Yeah, I've heard people say that people tripped up a little bit just thinking about like self-serve and PLG, product-led growth, is like the only way to sell, when in reality, it's almost like a pipeline strategy of filling up your enterprise pipeline that you then need to treat like a sales process. Like you need to get, it's more of like traditional enterprise sales at that point.
This is something that a lot of businesses need to discover and be honest with themselves about is our self-serve plan its own line of business, or is it lead gen for our enterprise business? And not every company knows on day one, though you have to be aware of why you have that self-serve plan. Segment is a great example of a business where they were learning about this over time. Like initially, like it was the self-serve business. And then they were like, okay, maybe it's just lead gen for enterprise. And then they're like, okay, actually there's a way to make both of these work. Optimizely is another business where, they had a self-serve plan. And then they kind of went all in on enterprise, and self-serve was meant to basically fuel leads to enterprise. Or, this is like a deep, like kind of enterprise SaaS business, but like App Dynamics is a business that they had a self-serve plan, though that self-serve plan, 50% of those leads went to enterprise contracts. Like it was purely like lead gen. And the way to answer the question of, is my self-serve business lead gen or its own independent business line, is I think net dollar retention. If the NDR of that segment of the business is above 100, that means it can compound by itself year after year, and it's less likely to become a shrinking portion of the overall revenue of the business. If NDR is too low, then, and too low here, I mean, HubSpot famously went public before they even had 100% NDR. But, if you have net dollar retention, like maybe well below, call it 80%, that means, at the 1 year mark, your number of customers, or at least your revenue is left from the same set of customers.
You go from $1 to 80 cents. Yeah.
Go from $1 to 80 cents. And that means as that part of the business grows, or as the business as a whole grows, that part of the business will be shrinking. And so you should ask yourself, okay, is this an independent line of revenue, or is this a way for us to fill, as you said, the enterprise pipeline with leads? My viewpoint is there's very low downside to, it's very contextual to like the business you're building.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good way to think about it then. It's just like, is it its own business that's self-sustainable? And I mean, and maybe you could also do both. Maybe it is its own business, but it's also a pipeline for like.
Correct. Yes. And that's the thing is like the lead gen is the floor, but if it's lead gen and its own line of business, then that's a ceiling. Twilio is a great example of a business where they had both an incredible self-serve motion that was self-sustaining and brought them to IPO, as well as an enterprise business. And again, the reason for that is basically like, what is your, is that part of the business compounding or not? And if it's not compounding, that's a good signal that its utility that doesn't mean it's suddenly a worthless part of the business. It means it's more likely to be, okay, how do we ensure that folks that are coming there are ultimately going to be lead gen, or the business is telling you, the market is telling you how to treat that part of the business. So at worst, it's lead gen. At best, it's lead gen and its own independent self-serving. Vercel is another great example of a business that does both very well. And they have the self-serve tier that hobbyists, hackers, small businesses can go and build. And then they have a pro plan where you can upgrade and deploy. And then they have enterprise plans. And their self-serve business is likely self-sustaining and also producing leads for its enterprise business. And so, I mean, like I mentioned, like, building a startup, you're learning and tweaking and changing and seeing like what's possible. Though I think the key thing is like being honest with what the market is saying of, should I think of this as lead gen alone or as well as a line of revenue to count on?
Yeah. And my intuition would say it is probably having both combined, everything kind of working all together, probably leads to a stronger business model, higher margins. I would just assume, just thinking about some of the examples you said, like all seem like pretty good companies versus I'm sure there's probably like a lot of companies where they have no self-serve. It's all enterprise. Maybe we haven't heard of them before, but then also some of those can be great businesses too.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a ton of enterprise SaaS businesses where trials might not even make sense. Like ServiceNow is like such a valuable, complex deployment, $200 billion company, though it just doesn't make as much sense to have some of like that's why I gave App Dynamics as the example, because they had a self-serve business that's intent was to fuel the enterprise business with leads. So I think you're right. Like low CAC, self-expanding, self-serve business is awesome. But frankly, like a lot of companies have this grass is greener effect where it's like you have like a really good self-serve business. You're like, man, why can't I get the enterprise business to work? Zapier is a good example of that, where like Zapier exists, has an amazing self-serve business, goes on a tear. And then you have other kind of competitors that pop up that are basically like Zapier for enterprise. And, the founders there have spoken on in public ways about, man, maybe we should have thought about that earlier. Now I think they have it dialed. So it's a good place to be. So basically, it's like if you're a self-serve business, you're looking over there at like these giant enterprise contracts. You're like, man, my friends have it so great on that side of the fence. And then folks that are in like enterprise land are looking over at self-serve and like, man, those low CAC customers that like just leads constantly, fish jumping into the boat. Like, man, why can't I have that? And so there's like a very classic grass is greener thing going on. And yeah, of course, I mean, the best is to have, why not both?
So another thing then, talking about lead gen, filling up the pipeline, developer marketing, you seem to have done a pretty good job of that. What's been kind of your strategy for getting in front of developers?
Well, I mean, I think one of the unfair advantages to getting in front of developers is to be a developer, to know like the products that I use and that I consume and what do I trust. Like you just kind of have this own smell test of like, does this product feel like one I can use and trust and really get to value with? Now, in terms of like turning that into a system in GTM, like what does that look like? What does that feel like? Developer-led products, maybe counterintuitively, a lot of the times when you're marketing the capabilities of a product for a non-developer-led product, you're saying heavily or maybe even exclusively value propositions of like what it does for the business, like move way faster, be more efficient, cut costs. And those things, of course, are relevant for engineers, builders, developers. The what is essential. Like you're talking to an audience that can pretty quickly conceptualize. If you say what it is, I can make a value judgment of like, would I use that and why would I use that and why wouldn't I use that? And so I think maybe counterintuitively, you need to be doing a lot of what, maybe even more than why.
So these are like examples, almost like giving them like something to look at and be like, oh, that's like, I can see that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking maybe in the context of like landing page, but broadly, yeah, like you're creating usage examples, you're creating high quality documentation, you're creating tutorials, you're showing what's possible, the art of the possible, and very much like showing, not telling. And the way it shows up on like maybe a landing page is you're describing like what the thing is. And then the subheader is like, and why doing it that way is more efficient or faster or capable or what it allows you to do. And so there's this tension of like a lead with what versus lead with why. And I think when building products for engineers, the what is like extremely important because I can make a determination of, oh, if that's what it does, I could see why that's useful for me.
And it seems like one place developers like to hang out is Hacker News. You've done a pretty good job at figuring out how to market your product on Hacker News. One of them I thought was pretty interesting, paint.wtf. Can you describe that really quick, what that was?
Yeah. So we made a game called paint.wtf. It's still live. That's like AI Pictionary. So you're given a prompt, like, for example, like a draft in the Arctic.
And this is made up, like AI just generates something.
Yeah. AI generates a prompt. We wrote the first like 10 prompts. And then when we built this, it was like GPT-3 era, not to date ourselves too much, but we're like, give like a bunch more prompts that are like these. So we've had it with like a bumblebee that loves capitalism, a giraffe from the Arctic, an upside down dinosaur. And then the user is given a Microsoft Paint like canvas in the browser and you draw that prompt. So I might draw like a giraffe with like a scarf and like some like icebergs in the background. And then I submit that drawing and then AI judges how close my drawing was to the prompt. And what was novel about Paint is it was built in 2021, right when OpenAI released an open source model called CLIP, Contrastive Language Image Pre-training. What CLIP introduced is this concept of being able to associate texts and sentences with images in a way that previously was very limiting. So what they did is they trained on 400 million image text pairs. And you could, for example, like show an image and then get words that are affiliated, like concepts that are affiliated with that image. So the way we used Clip is as the automated judge, right? So I have an image, a giraffe in the Arctic that a user drew, and I'm going to compare how similar this image is to the text of a giraffe in the Arctic. And using Clip's feature space, whatever image is most similar to what Clip considers is similar to the prompt is number one on a leaderboard. So basically like AI allowed us to unlock scalable, uncapped, automated judging of people's drawings.
And this was computer vision. It was literally like a human would look at it and judge, like, this is the best giraffe. This is the best depiction of the Arctic, upside down dinosaur, or whatever.
Exactly. And so like we put this out there and it ended up going mini viral. Yeah. The front page of some subreddits and trending on Hacker News. At peak, we were doing like 7 submissions a second. In the first week, 150,000 people played paint.wtf. And we learned some really funny things.
Really?
Yeah. About how AI thinks. Because if you think about it, like we train these models like Clip, for example, and we don't know like actually like what it knows. Like we don't know what concepts it affiliates or doesn't know. So I'll give you an example. Like one of the prompts was the world's most fabulous monster. And let's say you draw like Mike Wazowski and like a scarf, like a beautiful like pink boa. And then let's pretend like I draw like Sully and like he's like on like a run with like a catwalk in a fashion show. And we both submit these. We would learn like what things Clip more associates with like a fabulous monster. Like, does it think like a catwalk is more fabulous than your like boa? Does it think that like Mike Wazowski is more fabulous than like Sully? And like other things that we learned that's like kind of interesting. Like imagine you and I submitted the same drawing, but my background was like pink and your background was like purple. And let's imagine everything else was the exact same about the drawing. We learned that like the embedding space for fabulous is closer associated with pink than it is like with like purple. Or like a really funny thing, we made a game on the internet, right? And so we had some interesting submissions I could talk about, but also we had people that would submit the prompt just written on the canvas, right? So like I'm given the prompt and I just write in Microsoft Paint style, like the prompt back. And we learned that Clip could read because Clip would consider those prompts of someone just writing more similar than some drawings. And so then like we learned that people were like gaming the system and like realizing that Clip could read was crazy. And then we learned like, again, we made a site on the internet where people can draw images and submit them as strangers. So you know what you get from doing something like this on the internet. And so we would then like ask Clip like, hey, is this image that someone submitted more similar to NSFW or more similar to the prompt? And if Clip said the image was more similar to NSFW, then we would like blur it out. And so like users, even if they wanted to like spam the site with sort of stuff that like didn't degrade the quality. So basically we started to use Clip to moderate Clip. Like you're using the model to like moderate itself. And so we learned all these like fascinating things. One other thing that was kind of interesting is that like Clip is trained on like real world imagery. And these are people that are drawing in Microsoft Paint. And so the fact that Clip even understood like these very poorly drawn, sometimes really brilliantly drawn images in the browser was also insightful. We're like, wow, like Clip is a really powerful model. And so building paint.wtf was, multifold. One was like new model, like let's make something fun with it. And as mentioned, like I feel like you don't really know a technology till you build with it. And so building with Clip exposed to us what was possible. And what ended up happening is, in addition to all these learnings about Clip and building a fun viral experience, and folks still play this like at Roboflow, like for internal games, or play it at your next like onsite, or like your next like your warm up on Monday, like your all hands, like have everyone play a paint.wtf prompt and you'll get some like delightful things. But also it allowed us to realize one, like how to build infrastructure that can serve Clip at 7 submissions per second. So we're on a high scale without going down. So like that was an important thing. And then a second thing was realizing the power of Clip. And so realizing that Clip can understand things in a very valuable way allows us to allow users at Roboflow to better understand their data sets. Like which images are most relevant for improving model performance, which images are most similar in a given embedding space, or doing something that's so-called semantic search of like, I can search a concept of like expensive and then get back images or video frames that are most similar to that concept. And so building Paint, it was partially like a fun thing to put out there in the community. And it's awesome that HN really enjoyed it. It was also like a key way for us to stay current and realize what's possible with current computer vision.
I think you had another one too that was kind of fun. It was this like Mountain Dew Super Bowl challenge. Can you talk about that one real quick?
The Super Bowl challenge is such a goofy story. So I was watching the Super Bowl. I think this was the 2021 Super Bowl. And during the first half, there was this ad that Mountain Dew ran where John Cena, the wrestler, is in this pink car driving through a theme park, a Mountain Dew theme park. And across the screen, there's like hundreds of like Mountain Dew bottles, like appearing all over the place, like hidden in the background, jumping all over, on the steering wheel, in the carnival games. And at the end of the ad, Mountain Dew goes, the first person to submit the correct number of Mountain Dew bottles that were seen in this ad wins $1 million. And I was like, this is a computer vision challenge in plain sight. We want to see like all the Mountain Dew and like count them and like produce it. And so I immediately like turned off the Super Bowl.
I just don't know what happened. Don't know who won.
I went and I found the ad. Someone like Mountain Dew was ready and they posted it on YouTube. So like I grabbed it like quickly. And then I started to annotate all like the Mountain Dew bottles. I wrote Brad at halftime. I was like, hey man, like I know you're enjoying your football, but like we're spending halftime not watching the halftime show. We're finding Mountain Dew bottles. And so we like annotated all these like Mountain Dew bottles, and then we trained a model and we deployed the model and we wrote up like a example of like how you can use computer vision. And when you have like an MLOps pipeline, how quickly you can go from a video or your own data set to a model that can see things, count things, and deploy them. And I posted that to HN, and people loved it. They were like, oh my gosh, yeah. Like, cause I mean, it's like using technology to like get ahead. And it's like, you know, it's sort of a hack of like getting ahead in some ways. One of the things that was really cool was a researcher at Google Brain like tweeted a link to the blog post and was like, this is actually like a really good example of why you want robust like ML pipeline, like as like pedestrian as it is. And that was like really encouraging to see folks that have the expertise of those in the field to recognize the importance of it.
It sounds like maybe it was also culturally relevant or very timely. So it also contributed to like just the interest around it because it was like at the Super Bowl, everyone had seen this thing. So it's kind of like a relatable thing. I mean, you see it all the time with like internet marketing. It's like, how can you tie something into the current thing that's taking over the algorithms?
You're the expert at this. You have built a whole fund around being relevant and topical with the current online internet conversation. Like I'm like envious of your ability to like the wittiest quote tweets and like greatest takes. That's marketing, right? It's like, how do you ensure the thing that you're working on remains topical, germane, interesting, and exciting to sometimes like the flavor of the day considerations.
Yeah. And then I think another interesting moment, you actually got mentioned on the All In podcast one time. Was that expected, unexpected? Like what happened there?
We didn't expect it. Craft Ventures led our Series A. David Sachs is on the Roboflow board and has been an awesome person to help support building a high quality company. So he has awareness of the business. And actually, I mean, being recently named AI Czar, AI and Crypto Czar.
AI and Crypto Czar, yeah. What a title.
Is something that I think folks should be encouraged by is, you know, Craft invested in Roboflow's seed round in 2020 and then got ahead and did our Series A in 21 and continued to invest in some of the future rounds that we've raised. The interest, intrigue, and conviction that Sachs in particular has had for like open source AI before it felt like maybe the obvious thing to work on, I think is really encouraging for what that means for AI policy and its implications.
Can you explain that for somebody who doesn't get what you just said?
Yeah. The current AI landscape is fragile. Like AI is a new capability. We're not exactly sure everything it's going to be able to do. We know it's extremely transformative. And usually when there's a new technology and you're not sure of all the things that are possible with it, you want to allow innovation to flourish. You want people to be experiment. You want people to see what's possible. You want them to build and create and tinker. And one of the best ways to ensure that people have freedom to innovate and tinker and try things is to make it accessible, make it open source, make it so that anyone, anywhere can start to build and create with that technology. There's been a discussion of should AI, because it's an incredibly powerful technology, be less open source? Does it introduce risk because there's capabilities that someone could use AI for that we don't want AI to be used for? Therefore, would it be logical for us to limit and erect barriers to being able to adopt AI? And should there be bans on releasing models openly? And this is a discussed and debated matter, generally ensuring that AI can be easily consumed, used, and built is going to unlock like the most good. And right now, AI is at somewhat of a turning point of how impactful it's going to be. And the best way to realize the impact of AI is to put it in the hands of builders, to see what it can do, to see what it can't do. And so, for example, having someone like David Sachs thinking about ushering in AI policy and showing a preference for investing in and aligning to open source companies is a good vote of confidence for ensuring that companies can continue to tinker and explore uses. And by the way, like you can very credibly make the arguments of, yeah, AI can be used for bad things. And there, kind of point to the early internet, right? Like you could use the internet to process payments. You could also use the internet to commit scams and wire fraud. You use the internet to share photos with your friends from vacation. You use the internet to share unsavory photos. Like there's of course things that you can use technologies for, good and bad. Ultimately, where things I think often get mixed is saying the technology or the tool is bad misses what the use case is. And so I'm really encouraged that we'll be able to have increased amounts of open source focus as the policy to encourage and discover the best use cases. And concurrently, the way that we should ensure that misuse doesn't happen is you say misuse is the thing we want to regulate against. You should not be able to commit scams. You should face consequences for scams. And that's the same with AI. So like AI itself is an incredibly powerful tool. Allow it to flourish. And then the use cases that you don't like, which won't be new, right? Like the bad things that people do online is not new, like deceit, fraud. Those are the things that we should continue to say. If you do those things, whether you use AI, the internet or not, we should not allow those things to happen. So overall, like I'm incredibly excited by a emphasis on enabling discovery of new uses. I'll make this really real for you. Like our users will work on creating models in healthcare, accelerating cancer research, where you run a series of wet lab experiments and you get cross sections of cells and you identify and count proteins that react to a given treatment called neutrophils. And counting all those neutrophils on like a given cell underneath a microscope, very tedious thing to do and a perfect one for computer vision. And so they built a model that automatically counts all of the neutrophils so that wet lab work can be done more effectively, which increased the rate at which they can accelerate their research from taking a full day between each of the runs of the experiment.
Oh, it would take a day to count them all?
Yeah, for all the trials that they were running. And so now you can do that in 30 seconds and you can just go and run the next trials. And think about it, that compounds, right? Like it's not just that one day of experiments, it's all those future experiments. Like everything gets slowed down if you don't have the accuracy of the model or the accuracy of the counts of the treatment that you applied. And that was only possible because someone out in the open was able to say, cool, like I want to take a model and I want to train it. Now, one could argue, like logically be like, wow, healthcare, incredibly high stakes space. Before you're allowed to use AI in healthcare, you need to apply for a permit because healthcare has very real consequences on people.
Yep, I could definitely see that.
Right? And if you introduced a claim like that, then the graduate student that identified and created this method assuredly would not have been in a position to identify the regulation, maybe have a lawyer validate because the university is going to be like, we don't want to incur the risk of someone violating healthcare policy in the US. And it's use cases like that that get stymied that are so important. And so while we're discovering and uncovering what's possible with AI in the real world, we need to ensure that open innovation can continue. Otherwise, things as important as cancer research get slowed down. We will have cures to cancer slower if we limit the rate at which AI can help us understand health outcomes. So I'm encouraged and excited by the ability for AI to be in a position to flourish in the US.
Yeah, and I think if you just think about it as like any new technology, like when we created steel,
Like you could say, oh, cool, we can create buildings that don't fall down and people can live in these and they're safe. You know, your house isn't made of sticks and mud and like it won't collapse when there's a storm. Or you could also say, oh, we make swords out of them and we murder people with them and they should be banned. Like we should have no steel or no iron or whatever. Or even like boats, right? It's like, oh, we use boats to travel faster, to fish, get new food. Pirates, right? Like, you know, 1,000 years ago, like there's pirates, like, oh, no boats. Like if you go on a boat, because they're pirates use boats. So yeah, it's definitely kind of one of those things. You just got to be really nuanced of understanding like everything can be used bad. We could be using you can use podcasts to spread misinformation or whatever. Like we should ban all podcasts because you can't fact check what they're saying or something. Like you can do that with like any technology. So, or any new form of anything.
And I get it. Change is uncomfortable. Change has disruption. These things are not like easy, low nuance issues. But like you said, like any prior technological advance has returned so much opportunity for improving life expectancy, improving earning potential, improving the type of leisure that can take place.
Well, like fire too. Like imagine if we banned fire when we first invented fire back like, 100,000 years ago, right? It's like, oh, it can burn you. It can burn down our mutt huts. But that led to everything else.
Yeah, the Central Village Committee has deemed that fire can burn people and fire is no longer allowed in this village. Yeah. Enjoy your sushi, not your cooked fish. Thank you.
Yeah. What about the wheel? Could the wheel be constrained? I mean, maybe if you use it to like steal and you like get away faster in your getaway a cart.
I'm in Village A. I'm in an uphill village. You're Village B. You're downhill village. I'm rolling my wheels down the hill and they're taking out. You're like, man, I am going to campaign to ban wheels. These are obviously contrived examples. But the point that you're making is right, which is the technology is something that can be used and wielded as a tool. We as a society should aim to discourage misuse, not discourage the technology itself.
One thing I also want to hit on before we've kind of already got past the Hacker News stuff, but I think it's interesting. Like if I'm listening to this and I'm like, okay, you obviously really understand and you really get this marketing stuff. How do you get at the top of Hacker News? Like how should I approach? Like if I'm a founder asking like, Joseph, how do you guys do so well there? Like how would you talk someone through just thinking about like doing well, performing and getting visibility on Hacker News?
To get to the top of Hacker News, you got to build things that are topical, kind of fun, or like a deep dive into a given topic. Those are kind of the things that like typically perform well there. At the end of the day, it's a news site. So usually there's a sense of recency and things that are topical. And then there's also like a pretty strong bend towards science and technology interests. And so when there's like really strong deep dives into like how something works or advances in like energy development, supply chain, or a key like software capability, those things will end up performing well too. So there's not like a perfect playbook, but I think there's some tips that I might give. Like one is authenticity, like things that you genuinely find interesting as an engineer, likely other engineers will find interesting.
So maybe think about it more as like on a personal level versus like a projecting what you want to project from like a marketing standpoint.
Exactly. I think that's like number one. Is that like the second that you're trying to think of like, this is something that I want to make to go viral on Hacker News, it's almost like
it's not going to go viral.
Versus like, here's something that's like interesting to me and probably therefore interesting to others. And people have like done these analyses of like what stuff like goes to the top often. And it's usually like personal blogs and projects, open source projects, and tech advances and news for the most part. Those are the sorts of things that people are particularly interested in, which skews towards, like people that are giving an individual viewpoint on a capability. So maybe like some examples are useful for what we've seen people find interest in. Like one was, like you mentioned earlier, the Super Bowl story, that kind of has like some of the raw elements, right? It's like, it's topical, it's fun, you're kind of like breaking a system. And that was like really interesting to me to like see, like, could you use computer vision to like count all the Mountain Dew bottles? Like, could I win $1 million by building a vision model? And I knew that was like fun, but I also knew that it had to be urgent because the Super Bowl is a point in time thing. And so
Yeah, you probably have like within the next day. Like if you waited another day, people are just gonna kind of forget about this.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and there's probably also an element of, I mean, you probably see this with Mr. Beast, is he gives away money or earning money, like any kind of monetary reward or incentive. I mean, that's game shows, like all game shows on TV, they always give away money in some regard. So I guess you can't just like, yeah, it's like give away $1 million to get to the top of Hacker News, but you played on someone else giving away $1 million to get to the top.
That was, yeah, that you're right. That was lucky that I had a big like numeric dollar value attached to it for you and stuff. I mean, some other stuff that we've written that like is again interesting to us, that is interesting to others. Like when GPT came out with the ability to have vision included, we were like, how well does this work? Where does it work and where does it not work? And so we kind of like wrote like first impressions with like GPT-4V, what the model was called at the time. And we kind of want to do that work anyway. So we could tell our users, like, here's what you can expect and here's what you can't expect. And fortunately, a lot of folks found that interesting. Again, the thing about why that one was interesting, it's because there's topical. It's like on a new model release. So that's like something people are intrigued by. OpenAI is a leader in advancing AI capability. And so things that demonstrate what you can expect from those models usually has a level of interest to it. It's like genuine interest. There's utility. Like, what can I expect from this thing? And yeah, it's kind of like rapid response. There's like first impressions of things that we were interested in. We've had users build things that make it to the front page of Hacker News. Some of these are funny too. Like
that's UGC for you guys, like UGC Hacker News climbing.
Yeah, like, and like we encourage people like pretty regularly, like, hey, if you are interested in working out Roboflow, like build something. And if you build things that are interesting, that's usually a good signal that like you have a pulse of the types of projects that should be built. But anyway, like one person built this thing that drops hats, New Yorkers, from his apartment window.
Oh yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, he called it like drop of a hat.zone. And he had like these sign up slots that if you went to an intersection in New York, a hat would magically drop and fall on your head from above. Like that's just like that's a great one where it's not topical, but it's just so like WTF, like your hats in New York City falling on people. And he's using computer vision to like see when there was the person there and where their head was and where the hat should be dropped. That same guy, he made another project that rates your cat loaf. So I learned this concept that like the way that cats will sit, sometimes people will call it like a loaf of bread.
Oh, okay.
And so you like take a photo of your cat, and if its paws aren't showing and like you just get like the outline of the body of the cat, and that's like a good cat loaf. And so he made this product that you upload an image of your cat and you get a score, like how good of a cat loaf your cat was performing at the time. That's another one where it's like, it's kind of like another like WTF, like I'm intrigued, what is that sort of thing? And clearly like this guy built it for like, again, a common trend. Both these projects were built for him, right? Like he wanted to like give hats to people in New York City from his apartment. He wanted to see like how loaf-like his cat was and see like how that compares to other cats. And so there's just something you said here of just following your curiosity, and then that's going to generally be more authentic and things that are interesting. And maybe the last mile piece is like ensuring that you write well about the thing. And because I think a lot of like engineers have really intriguing and thoughtful considerations about current events or like releases or capabilities, and just doing like the last step of pen to paper that goes a long way. But Hacker News also kind of has like memory. So like if you get known as like a thing that like is low quality or is interesting, that can go, that can curry direction in favor. Like there's some like Simon W, for example, is like always on the front page of Hacker News. His blogs are really good. He has interesting things to say. He's evaluating the capabilities of models. So people trust his opinion and know him. And when they see Simon W content, this is Simon Willison, if you're familiar.
Huh. It sounds like that could actually go the other way too, where if you like if you don't make good work or it's low quality, people would just be like, oh, this is from this Joseph Nelson guy. Like he's kind of an asshole, or he's kind of,
Yeah, I think, it can definitely work against you. Because I mean, it is a community. And so people develop a reputation. And that's one thing that like at Roboflow, it's important to me that we continue to pursue our interests. Again, things that are interesting to us, that are useful for us to know what's possible with computer vision. That's a good thread to pull on. If it's interesting for us, then it's probably interesting to others too. And so we should explore those curiosities naturally and put them out in the world. So I don't know, the spoiler alert secret of how to get on the front page of Hacker News is pursue your curiosities and write about them.
Hot take, but very simple, actually. Very simple, but probably very complicated, very hard to execute on. Then we can probably talk a little bit about, like, what do you think is the most interesting thing going on in AI right now? Just like, what are you kind of following and pay attention to? Maybe AI and computer vision specifically. Like, what are you most excited about that we might not, the casual observer might not be realizing is kind of going on or happening kind of like right now?
A lot of AI advances now are focused on making use of multiple sources of data. So there's images, there's text, there's voice, and this is known as multimodality, multiple modalities used in tandem to give understanding. And that's really promising because you can have more context. And at the end of the day, like, AI is reasoning systems and intelligence, and context comes from multiple places. And so using context together allows you to produce more powerful systems. Within computer vision, there's some nuance here where language text pairs are useful and insufficient for a lot of what problems people want to solve with vision. Previously, we were talking about counting things, and there's good progress with counting things with like language text pairs. And also there's a need to have precise, so-called like beyond token level understanding of images. Maybe like a way to think about this is, if you remember, people were joking about counting the number of R's in strawberry with one of the recent models. One of the reasons that models, as capable as they are, struggle with something that seems so simple is the way that tokenization happens. That is, like, the way the model sees the characters in the text, strawberry, and processes them. And that tokenization that transformers perform can limit precision. Doesn't definitionally, but it can limit precision. And if you think applying that to pixels, right? Like, an image is a construction of pixels. The precision of where edges start and stop, or the number of things present, is even more important. And so that's like a pretty big opportunity, both for multimodal models, but also just like the field in general of making that increasingly easy. Now, traditionally, the way that we've solved that is by breaking into tasks focused on things like object detection or instance segmentation or classification. And increasingly, I think those will get better and more performant in pre-training. Another trend I think that's really exciting is transformers generally being able to power a lot of these capabilities. Like, convolutional neural networks, CNNs, have historically been like the core backbone part of computer vision. What transformers offer, and especially like pre-trained large models, is you can have knowledge already and just use it. So what does that mean for the field? It's like, instead of needing to go start by collecting a data set, which can be arduous, maybe the data is not accessible, it adds a lot of time, it's complex, you need to prepare and curate and annotate. Increasingly, you can just like start with a model that like sees you can do stuff that you already want to do. And large pre-trained models offer that promise, which is really, really, really exciting.
So that just lets you get going faster because you don't have to go and like train your Mountain Dew bottles. Like, this is what a Mountain Dew can looks like, and I can just get up and going. Yeah.
Another modality that's interesting is the sense of time. So there's, as we're discussing, like voice and image and text, there's also a time-based component that's particularly relevant for video. And so being able to have models that understand both spatial and temporal things means that they can do video reasoning way more effectively. And so you're seeing this with like Gemini, for example, and Google has really led the way, I think, in like large video context, understanding video question answer of like what's going on. And I think that trend is poised to accelerate. Of like, historically, computer vision models have been pretty naive in terms of how they view video, kind of limited by compute and limited by model capability, where like each image is almost viewed in independence. In reality, like, if I like drop a ball, where that ball is in frame 2, 3, 4, and 5 is non-random because gravity. And so I know that the ball is going to be, one position lower. And so if you're building a model to find the ball, it makes sense that having a sense of which frame came before helps me understand where the ball is going to be after. And so what that translates to is, like the video understanding capability. Another thing in computer vision is a lot of systems need to run in low compute environments. And so getting things to the edge, getting high quality models distilled down into smaller models is very important. You just don't always have the benefit of the cloud at your disposal for some of the problems that you want to solve. And so distillation and affiliated techniques are key to realizing that. And then maybe a last one, and this is one that I see a lot of promise in, and we're focusing on tooling for it, is visual agents. So the big trend in AI in 25 is going to be focused on the idea of agentic AI. How agentic AI differs from what we've seen in the past is with an agent, I can provide an objective and then let a system learn to accomplish that objective. And so I can say hey, buy me the best Christmas gift for Turner Novak. I can just give a shopping agent that open form of a goal. And that agent would need to maybe go look at your Twitter, go listen to prior podcasts, go figure out your interests, realize that you're based in Michigan, hear that you works on the Grand Upper Griffins and grew up playing hockey. And it's going to be great. I'm going to go purchase tickets to a Red Wings game because I know that that's going to be relevant for your interest. And an agent is going to go through and break down what the goal is, what the tasks are, execute on those tasks, and then perform it on your behalf. Visual agents will do this with visual outcomes, where it's I want to, hey, tell me whenever a package shows up on my doorstep. Tell me whenever there looks like there's going to be a jam on my line. Tell me when there's maybe suspicious activity taking place and I work in building facility security. And a visual agent can learn to reason about which models it should call, using those models, and then outputting results to other systems. And so we've been working a lot on an open source project built on top of inference, which is for serving models, but it's also for executing models intelligently and in a good order. So I'm going to use a first model to do this task, then another model to do this task. Then I'm going to connect it to some system to text you. And so we currently have a framework by which people can build these workflows. And increasingly, I'm excited by the opportunity to enable people to just provide goals and kind of one shot their way to a system that can do what they want it to do. So that's when you hear about agents and why people are so excited about them, that's kind of what's going on. And in a visual context, it's going to be related to processing visual understanding and reasoning and providing me with results.
Well, and it's probably too of you incorporate a writing input and output, but then also the visual input and output in terms of robotics or automating physical things also, where all these different touch points interact with each other. Again, it kind of sounds like you're in this crucial point of basically letting people use this new form of data in the process of interacting with software of some kind.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, visual agent approach means you can show up to Roboflow and say, I have this video and I want to get a text when blank thing happens, when someone spends too much time in this area or when there's too many people doing this, and constructing a system that will understand that for you and then giving you the ability to tinker and integrate that system is something I'm super, super excited about. So yeah, the trends are both related to things that are broader within the field, but also the cool thing about Roboflow is we've gotten to a size and scale now where we can also influence what the trends should be. And one tiny example of that, I wouldn't call it a broader trend, but I think it's something that's under indexed on, something that I don't think enough people are paying attention to that they should in visual understanding, is something called image-to-image prompting. This is a little in the weeds, but if you have a model and it knows a lot about the world, you can access information from that model by providing text, saying, hey, I'm going to type and say, hey, is this image outdoors or indoors? You provide that as text. Or I could provide a visual prompt where I say, hey, this part of the image, tell me everything that's in this region, or segment everything that's here. Or I can provide an image to an image model. And I could say, hey, here's something that I'm looking for, or I want to know how many of these things exist. So in the Mountain Dew bottle case, instead of like going and saying, hey, typing saying, hey, tell me about Mountain Dew bottle, you can actually provide an image of one of the Mountain Dew bottles. And then the entire rest of the, in this case, pre-trained model will be able to say, oh, I can tell you how many of those there are. And the reason that I think image prompting is so powerful is we've seen a lot of promise to it being a much more steerable, controllable way for models. And I think it's under indexed because people have just not explored and realized the potential. So that's something that we're particularly excited about. And we're probably going to publish like some benchmarks on this. We've already released some like open source data set benchmarks in the past for like novel tasks. And so the week that we're recording this is NeurIPS, one of the 3 large machine learning conferences. And the Roboflow team gave a presentation on like the state of 2024, machine learning and AI and what might happen in 25. That's really machine learning audience centric, but for folks that are interested in that, there's a live stream on latent space.
Interesting. Okay. I think one thing also is like, you're so kind of in the weeds of, you know, you'd think, oh, this guy probably lives in San Francisco. I probably grew up in the Bay Area. That's not true. Where were you born, and where are you first from?
Yeah, I grew up in Iowa, and like I kind of mentioned, my family has a connection to maybe stereotypically like agriculture in Iowa. Now, I grew up in a city, the booming metropolis of Des Moines.
Oh yeah, it's like tens of hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, there's at least dozens of us there. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a home where I guess there'd be like maybe the average amount of technology. We had the gateway computer, the family computer. We played Roller Coaster Tycoon, backyard sports games. There were some days, I mean, this is really going to date for the Gen Z folks, but like I remember there was like a day where I brought like a floppy disk with an essay to school once.
Oh, really? I never did that.
Yeah. Maybe earlier than that. Like I had to print it off and I had to bring it in. Getting into technology meant learning and just exploring on the internet, like the web. Like I remember getting like one of the very first things is I got like really into, there was this website called CNET that like reviewed technology and reviewed new phones. I remember like following very closely, like too closely. I had too much time, I guess, like when new phones would come out and their specs and like the Razor and things like that. And I don't know why that was like so interesting to me, but I followed along with it.
Well, I feel like that was kind of the heyday of like, oh, this like the camera is so much better, or like it's connected to the internet, like it has 2G or something, or like you can put games and it's like Snake or something. But like it was kind of bleeding edge at the time. Like there was some cool stuff that was happening.
It was. I mean, it wasn't until like when I like really got introduced to technology was, do you remember the TI-84 calculators, the graphing calculator from like calculus class? And you could load games on the like Blockman and even Mario in some cases. That was my older brother like would get some of the latest games and then share them with like classmates. Like you'd plug both your calculators in and transfer like.
Yep, I remember doing that.
And I realized that like you could actually make very, very basic programs on these calculators. Like the first thing was like teachers were like, you know, do not program the quadratic formula into your calculator.
Everyone had that program on their calculator.
That was the first no-go. So of course, what's the first thing you want to do? And then like, I kind of like realized you could like do a bit more. And so I made like the very first like program that I made, program in quotes, it's pretty basic, was this like joke generator where like every day in class, I would think of like 3 more like jokes and I would store those basically in like just a dictionary. And then there was like a random number generator, you know, generate a random number and then go use that number and pull the joke from that spot in the dictionary. And like the user would just get sort of a joke. You just put enter on the calculator and you get like a bunch more jokes. Very, very simple, but it brought a lot of delight. And the funny thing is like, I like shared it with other people when I would give them Blockman, and I wouldn't say that like I had made it, and it ended up going like mini viral through the school. Cause I think people like thought they had to transfer it to have it work to play some of the other like a utility program.
Yep, I remember this. How you'd like everyone would select like 10 things. Like you had to pick what got transferred.
Yeah. And I'd always transfer that. And then people I think just started like transferring it. So whether intentionally or not, I ended up on a bunch of calculators. And so some of the jokes in there, like people thought were like pretty goofy. And I just remember being like people like talking about and using it and finding a lot of excitement by this very pedestrian, simple thing. And that was like very much a spark for me. Like, wow, you can like write very, very simple jokes into a calculator program, and they can be distributed in a way that people can enjoy and see. And it just felt like I'm making a thing that like people are able to find delight in when I'm not even around. And like, it felt like the make money for free hack, except for like entertainment. So I was like, wow, like there's something here.
Yeah. So yeah, you couldn't make any money from it, I guess, back in the TI calculators. I actually made a TI calculator game. I think I made maybe a couple. The one that was actually good, it was like this RPG game of my friend. So like we were all nerds, but one of our friends was like really tall. So he was on the football team. And it was like this RPG where it was like his life and you try to get to the NFL. So there's only a couple options because it was entirely text based, but you could like study, go to class, take a test, and there was like workout, go to football practice, play a game, and then I think you could apply for the draft or something. And like I don't know if you remember how the basic programming worked on the calculator. Like you could store things as the letter variables. So there's only 26 variables that I could work with, but I use that to basically make this game where like you'd have to like study enough to have a high enough GPA to be able to play. You have to be like good enough, and like you could go to practice to get better at football. It was fun. Like it was the first thing I ever really programmed. I don't even know if I still have it. It was like very bad. Like, you know, looking back on it, like I think in college I played it again. I was like, this game sucks, but it was kind of funny.
No,
and it was
that's like layers of complexity, storing like progression, different paths. That's way more complex than my silly random number joke generator. That's awesome.
And all my friends thought it was hilarious because it was like we were all just like these nerds, right? Like we played like Halo and we like played computer games like in class. Like we all would take game design and like tech drawing and architecture classes in high school, and we just played games the whole time. And so we thought it was hilarious. Like one of our friends was on the football team, and like our football team was terrible. So, but we thought it was so funny that like, oh, so anyways. And then I think, well, speaking about games too, you did this thing called Pioneer, kind of early days of Roboflow, and maybe that's kind of how you got sort of into more of like, you know, plugged into tech from Iowa. But what was Pioneer and how did that work?
Pioneer was this online community that gamified to-do lists. It was kind of framed like a accelerator eventually, but the way that like Brad and I kind of described it is it was like the Hunger Games is like startup in some ways.
Okay.
The way that Pioneer worked is anyone in the world could sign up, and you would write your list of what you want to do for your project on Sunday in a text box, and then you'd submit it. And then the next week on Monday, you'd be presented with side by side 10 other examples of startup A said they were going to do this, and here's what they accomplished. Startup B said they were going to do this, and here's what they said they accomplished. Who did more? And you'd vote through 10 of these of head-to-head matchups of someone's to-do list versus what that person got done. And you would just say, like, who seems to have had, like, a more impactful week. And this, like, totally owned Brad and my psychology for a while. Like, the very first, like, when we first started working on Board Boss, which was, like, the AR board game solving thing, on Sunday, it was like a ritual. We'd go and we'd write what's going to be on our Pioneer for the week. And then we ensure that we got everything accomplished from like the last week. Because let me tell you, your Sunday self is a lot more ambitious than your Friday afternoon self. And so like ensuring that you did everything that you said you were going to do. And so it ended up being like we're competitive people, and there's a leaderboard globally of who is consistently getting voted that they've done more head to head.
And public, right? Like even people outside Pioneer.
Yeah. So like there's this public leaderboard of like the top 50 most productive projects in the world. And the way that like scoring actually worked is it used ELO, meaning like when you were head to head with another update, if you were higher ranked than them on the leaderboard and a company is lower ranked than you by ways, and someone votes that that lower ranked company did more than you, your rating drops way more. What does this mean? It means that like when you're at the top, you got to just continue to do your best to stay at the top. You know, they ultimately shut down Pioneer, but when it ran, we were at the like global #1 spot for like 20 some weeks in a row. And for like, I think a year plus, we were in the top 5 just because we were just so obsessed with like, and that was really critical in the formation of what we were doing and working on. Because like, for example, every week we would have like as a given, write 3 blogs and do 2 YouTube videos, no matter what, every week. That was 2 of the items. Plus like, I don't know, like close the first customer, ship X key feature, and, you know, debug blank thing. And you'd have these like updates, and that set such a good operating cadence. We just got into the habit of like, there were many Sundays that rolled around and I'd only written 1 blog for the week. And I was like, man, I said to myself, I would do this. I got to get this done. And there was sort of this like anonymity of accountability. And that was really formative. And so now actually kind of like, for me, I really like to find ways to ensure that, you know, I'm kind of like doing the best that I can. And so to this day, I actually now do like a weekly, we call it like a ship list. So like at Roboflow, we have, each team will have like ship lists of the things that they're proud of that they got in front of customers in the last week. I mean, I'll do one like individually, like things that I've done like as an IC within the last week. The whole company can see it and see how I'm doing, how I'm not doing, the things that I want to have done. And it really just helps set like a sense of like cadence and operating pace and, man, what can I get done for customers this week is something that you want everyone asking in your organization. And plus it's become like a bit of a ritual. So like on Fridays, for example, we do ship and tell, like show and tell, ship and tell, and you present things that are in production for customers that you've made. And it's all teams, right? So like this could be like product engineering. It could also be like the operations team made like a better careers page or a way to describe how to work at Roboflow, or got business insurance to ensure that like enterprise customers that want to trust us, we can validate that we have what they need to do business with us. And so it's a really, I mean, I think like there, you could probably draw like a very fuzzy dotted line between like Pioneer and like the idea of ship lists. But I think the truth is like you've seen throughout the startup community, people have operated at this weekly cadence. Like folks will regularly be like, you know, a week is 2% of a year. Elon famously
What'd you get done this week? Yep.
There's just this sense of like a week is enough time where you should be able to have something that you're able to stand on that you did, but also a short enough time where the continued progress should be evident. So Pioneer was very formative in that way. Plus, like, you know, it's a program where you met a lot of other folks in the community that like still to this day, like we stay close with. We've had the chance to like hire some pioneers at Roboflow. We've got the chance to even like share office space with pioneers in San Francisco at a point in time. Some pioneers have gone on to be investors in what we've been able to do. So it was a really like special experiment that Gino Gross and Nat Friedman had predominantly been, and then Rishi from AngelList had like stood up and worked on for a while. It was an awesome moment in time for both Roboflow and I think startup creation generally.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, I never did it, obviously, but I met founders that did, and everybody else says good things. Talking about the ship and tell, well, you just mentioned you have ex-Pioneer people. Like, do you hire a lot of former founders at Roboflow?
Yeah, we actually have it like on our careers page as like as an open role. I mean, the type of people that we find are especially successful at Roboflow, at least like what works for us, are those that are, you say like full stack people. If you're an engineer, certainly writing code to produce a feature is key. You should also be thinking about like, which feature should I write and talking to users to understand that that's the right feature to work on. And then you write the feature and then you want to drive adoption of that feature. Like I want to ensure that it's documented, that it works, that people are able to get value from it. And so like full stack in the sense of, yes, like that you might be working on front end and back end technologies, or I'm a designer and I can both like, I can also code to bring my ideas to life as well as like create experiences that deliver an intuitive and powerful capability for users.
But then make sure people can use it too.
And make sure people can use it. And so like this sense of like, I want, it's not necessary, not sufficient to like make a thing is like one thing that we find like folks like that hold that belief. A second thing is like being like independently motivated of like, you know, the holding oneself to like goals and being proactive and like creating and establishing and working against ambitious kind of outcomes and saying like, here's what I want to do and here's how I want to accomplish that. And here's how I think about how that's going. That's another thing that I think is really a key. And then a third is just like folks that are like healthily impatient. Like, why can't we get things into to users' hands more quickly? Or like, I only have one life to live, and so the impact that I can make is capped based on the time. Therefore, I should optimize and do things as quickly as I can to ensure that the results are felt. And so those things are often like, as you said, like former founders like often think with like a strong sense of autonomy and like ownership and wanting to create these capabilities. It's not the only way, of course, but someone comes to possess those attributes. Though it's one way that we found. And the thing that like is really key, I think a lot of companies say that they really like to have folks that display those attributes. It's another piece to like work effectively in that environment. There's not like a free lunch here. Like to enable someone that thinks that way to be successful is to actually, I think, be a far more bottoms up organization. Like giving people the wherewithal and not only permission, but like expectation of like what you want to work on, how do you want to achieve the goal. So we have this expression at Roboflow that someone is like, we say fully ramped when you've like chosen your own loss function. Like a machine learning model is like optimized for a loss function, and a person that realizes, hey, like I want to ensure I know what my loss function is and I can optimize against that. And so what that means is that like creating the space. And so like the way that we operate is also like pretty, sometimes like it's like a splash of cold water when folks like come in. For example, like we do things like in a really open way of like, we try to use open Slack channels as much as possible to share like what progress is. And even if you're collaborating on just one other person of a given thing, maybe you like write in a blog and you're going to publish the blog and there's one other reviewer of the blog, still do that in like an open channel, not a DM, because you never know who's like, oh, wow, that blog was going to come live. I wanted to send that to my customer. Or I'm like on the branding team, I want to know, like, how did you make an image to describe that concept? Or someone like knew that blog was going to go live, but didn't know when it was going to go live. And just the fact that saying that you're working on it is an implicit like status update to where something is progressing. And so working out in the open like has this massive, massive advantage of giving context and the ability for someone to be successful. And again, it's in concert with this idea of if you empower people who are motivated and want to do things, enabling them to have access to what's going on, the information to synthesize and make the right decisions, is all these things kind of move in concert. So it's not a free lunch, like for sure. Like it can be.
It sounds like maybe information overload. Like it's just, if there's 1,000 open Slack channels instead of, 10, because everything is public instead of private, maybe it takes forever to get through them all.
Yeah, that's actually a thing that we've like faced as we've scaled. Is like, how do we balance the ability to like give the necessary context without like overwhelming someone?
How did you do it?
We're still figuring it out. The way that we've started to do it is like kind of like mitosis of project. So it's like, for example, like we used to have just like one sales channel, and then we have like a sales channel that like all people were in, that were in, like all the company, and then like a sales internal that was just the sales team. And now it's like, okay, now like you have a sales internal, now you have like individual customer channels plus like individual prospect channels. So it's kind of like a mitosis, and all of these are like still public channels, which creates almost the ability for others to opt in. Like, let's say that you were an engineer and you worked on a feature that you knew was for prospect ABC, and you want to know, like, is prospect ABC responding well to that feature? Well, you can join that channel to follow along with the progress of that deal, but you're not expected to either. It's kind of like, it allows a bit more opt-in of what someone wants to know. But just like you're mentioning, like there's this difficult information architecture problem. Like, what is the right amount that someone needs to have context to do their role successfully, but still have the opportunity to get more context if they want it? And so that's like ever evolving and better understood as we grow at Roboflow. But the thing that like we know that is really key is like, I've just like continued to underestimate how useful it is for people to be able to learn from each other's progress and what they've done in the past, and to collaborate. So I don't know that to solve problems so much as it's ever evolving, that the benefits outweigh because the alternative, right, is like you can have a lot of siloed information. It can be very difficult to know, like, is something on track, or what features are coming along, or these sorts of things. So I think probably the next step of like the evolution is having a bit more like highlights per channel sort of thing. But I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe like Slack AI finally gets good enough and it just kind of like solves all this for us. So I can just be like, hey, like, give me a summary of what's going on here. Ping me every time someone talks about customer ABC because I know I want to help them.
Does Slack have any much AI stuff? I haven't even really noticed much.
They added Slack AI.
What is it even?
We'll like summarize threats for you. We'll kind of like give you more context. It's a really hard problem for Slack to know what one's organization wants to be shared across the organization. So you have like the hardest, like what should go in the training data versus not, like what answer, like it's really actually like an access to information problem if you're Slack of like, which I mean, for us, generally it's kind of like if, maybe we're well primed for that problem because public channels help make that decision to some degree. But someone that, started a company in the past and wants to continue to have the autonomy and position to be successful and really likes to own talking to users, getting things to production, and wants to be a part of a rapidly growing, high performing group of people, like that's the type of like folks that like often in that environment are the ones that do well here.
How do you guys do, like, what does your hiring or interview process look like? And we'll also throw a link in the show notes, like, I don't know, Roboflow/careers. I don't know, whatever. I'll find it. I'll throw it in.
Yeah, roboflow.com/careers. Every role says the process for that role. Generally, it's like, first sort of conversation, understand that someone's intent and what they want to do and their background is right, like the way that we work, their ambitions of when they would be able to work and some of those things. Then they'll speak with the person who looks after the team that they'd have the opportunity to join. At this point, there's a bit of a fracture, like after that, of like technical screening for engineers, an exercise for maybe go to market. I meet every person and intend to for the foreseeable future to get to know like how they think, how they operate. Often like someone's had the chance to speak with others across their team by the time I get to chat with them. So I can kind of know areas that we'll want to dive into, whether it's like culturally someone being successful or like a given skill set area or maybe questions for me is type of thing. One thing that might be notable about like all of our roles that isn't same at every company is we expect everyone to build with Roboflow during the process, regardless of role. And we find that this ends up being like a really good signal for someone, A, like is excited by the products that we're building and what we're making into the world. And B, it's just like interviews are very lossy to get to understand someone. I think you can get a lot of culture signal, but you don't know what someone's work is like. And so by creating like a shared thing that both folks work on or that someone's going to work on, you get a sense. And if it's like, we deliberately kind of make it open-ended because then what you get back is you get an expression of like how someone interprets like an open-ended challenge. Like if you build with Roboflow, show us what you made, why you made this decision, what you found intuitive, where you got stuck, where you got unstuck, do you have product feedback, like, and so that's like a really useful way of like, and frankly, like you could do this for like any, like we could do this if like go build with, I don't know, like Notion or something, and we could get similar signal, just like how do you approach an unstructured task? But even better, of course, that it's in the context of Roboflow, because for the candidate, they also then are like, this company says they make things that are easy and intuitive and fun. Are they? Like, am I finding myself like able to build and create? And like, am I inspired by the stuff that I would be getting to work on? And so it's like, it ends up being like a two-way assessment of, is someone excited by the things that we think should exist in the world? And do we get a sense that someone approaches their work with the seriousness and excitement that we hope that people who we have the chance to work with would do so?
Interesting. One of my tricks is, you probably do a lot more hiring than I do, but my general strategy is you kind of give them some kind of like assignment or action item. And then I just tell them to like follow up with me and just like send it to me whenever they're done. And that kind of also gauges like how quickly do they do it and follow up, like 10 minutes after the call, or is it maybe like the next day and it's like really well done, or do they never get back to me? And it's like, all right, cool. I didn't spend any time thinking about this afterwards. Like I put it in their shoes. I'm just like, all right, this is, I want to see an example of something, like go do it and send it to me. Cause in that way it's like, can you trust that person to just go do what they need to do? And like, do they have autonomy? And I mostly want to hire people that I don't have to babysit. So, it's like, here, go do this. And if they do it, then it's like, okay, cool. Can trust you to do that.
The interesting thing about like being the babysit comment, like what's interesting is if you talk to people, no one wants to be babysat and no one wants to hire someone that they need to babysit. So usually it's just it's usually just a difference of what does that look like for both the person, like the closest way to realize what one's expectation of what does it mean for me to not be babysat, combined with what someone doesn't want to have to do to babysit somebody, is to see an expression of one's work. And so if that work is close to the mark, as you're describing, then it gives you a positive signal that this person works diligently, quickly, and completely, and you have high confidence that they will be able to be successful. So I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss about, like, they sometimes we don't think about with hiring. The matchmaking process is really what it is, rather than like an inherent like good, bad value judgment. It's like, okay, great. Like, do we think similarly about what it means to do X thing? And if so, then great. We're going to be able to do a lot of success together.
Yeah. And actually, so I didn't think I was going to do this, but I was just thinking about this over the last 2 minutes. One thing I've been kind of trying to figure out is I'm looking for somebody to kind of help me sort of part-time-ish, just with a couple things on the podcast. So I've kind of talked to a couple of people about it. And my open-ended question is literally like, what would you do to market the podcast? What would you do to grow it? And it's open-ended. I don't even care what you do. It's just do something and I'll see if I like it. And that's actually a weed out, because like a lot of people, they'd be like, oh, I'm really excited about helping you. Like I have all these ideas, like cool, like just do one. And then not doing it, that actually weeds out a ton of people. So if you're listening to this and you have ideas of how I should grow the podcast, seriously, like reach out to me. I'm interested in finding somebody to help me out with this. I'm not looking for somebody full-time. It can literally be like a couple hours a week. You can be in school. You can be like working at a startup, founder of another startup. I don't care who you are, but it's something I've been kind of trying to figure out. So good way to get through my interview process, I guess, is just do stuff. You know, what did you get done this week?
Exactly. Yeah. High agency, show up, do it well, be proud.
And I think the secret too is I stick that at the very end of the episode, where if somebody's listening, you know, we'll probably be about like, you know, 110 minutes into the episode. If they're still listening, they probably like the podcast. So they might have ideas. Well, yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on. I feel like we hit on a lot of good stuff.
Thank you for having me. It's a ton of fun.
And thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please leave a quick review or comment wherever you're listening or watching. Make sure to check the show notes for more on the topics mentioned throughout the conversation. And if you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, to get each episode plus the transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.